Does your probe window shake, come around really crazy, and almost come out like this, where it's past and out of the track? Well, I have the solution for you, and we're going to show you exactly how to take the window out, put the new pieces in, and put it all back together. Okay, to get the window out, you actually need the window about down halfway from the top instead of all the way to the top. The second thing you have to do is you have to remove your door panel, which has a screw in here, or if you have the 95 and up door panels, the 2 screws through the handle. So the door pocket has a piece over the screw hole because nobody wants to look at a screw or feel a screw when you're working on your doors. So once we pull this screw and store it down here, we can pull the bottom screw down here. If I can find it. And these are all Phillips head screws on this end, on the stock stuff. If somebody's done something to your car and changed stuff in the past, you may have something else, but most of this stuff is going to be Phillips head. This screw will actually kind of just stay in here because the carpet will hold it on the door. And then we'll get our upper screw out. And so we've got this one. This, depending on how well it's in your car, this one's a little messed up right now, has 2 electrical connectors. There's one at the top here for the mirror, and then there's one at the bottom for the actual buttons. And on the passenger side, if you pull the passenger side electrical connector off, the windows won't always work either. You kind of have to have them connected. And then inside here, where our piece is the rod that comes out, and it has a flip piece, and I'll show you that right here. So there's a rod that goes up through here because it's hooked at the end of the rod, and then this pops over the rod to hold this onto it, so the rod pops, and that way your rod doesn't fall out while you're driving down the road. Now once we've done that, on this car we've got some modifications on here. We've actually got a screw back here now instead of the usually pop. It's usually a plastic pop-in piece that holds it together from factory. And then we can take and make sure the door panel is released off of the door. That's the problem with the two-piece panels, is they have some fun coming apart. Have to shift the door panel up out of the door frame. And as we can see, we've got the clips here that hold the door to the car. Okay, once you have your door panel out of the way, you'll have your plastic that's usually tightened onto here because from factory it's that way. But once you've messed with it some, or somebody's come in and changed speakers out or something, it's usually not quite so good anymore. But this black stuff stretches, and what sticks the plastic to the door frame. You have 2 main things to pull off the door. You have to pull the door stops for the window, and there's one back here. It's 10mm bolt, and these are what set your window stop, the stop point of the window as it goes up. And then there's one over here. And the back one has a solid screw hole, so you can't just slide it up out. The front one, you can unscrew it a little bit, stick your finger in here, and it should slide out without taking the screw all the way out. Okay. So as you can see, these are just a quick screw and a piece. And then the window itself has its own 110mm bolt here on the track, and that's why you have to have the window halfway or partially down, is so that you have full access to this piece. Once you have that loosened, grab the window, lift up just a little bit, make sure this track gets clear of it, because this is what locks it together. And then you can slide the window straight up, or almost straight up out of the car. as long as you're not catching too much stuff in the thing. Oh, there went one of the truss pieces. So as you can see, we just have the posts here hanging out on this window and not the rest of the stuff. That's what is broken on the window. There's one of the pieces now that's supposed to be on the window. Now this is out of another door frame, but this is actually a right-hand side window guide. This is what the factory piece looks like, and sometimes these stay pretty good. If you have a factory one that is still in perfect shape, don't replace it. Just go ahead and leave it there. This is the replacement units, and you can see that's almost the same size as the factory piece, and they do a pretty good job of doing a replacement. They're not quite as big around, but they slide down over the post. So this is our door track that we're actually going into, and I'm going to put the factory one down in there and show you what, it's got a really tight fit. That's why they work so well from factory. But once you go to no post, or this breaks apart, you can all of a sudden go completely out of the track and all over the place, and that's why your window goes haywire. The new pieces that I have come in, they don't have like I said, they're not quite as thick as the factory piece, but when they're holding, they do a pretty good job of keeping you in the track and keeping you most of the way back to at least 90% of factory usage. Okay, now that we have the window out and safely supported on something so we're not going to break it, we undo the bolts holding the window down, and you want to do these kind of loosen them together a little bit. They have a bushing in the back of them. Just 4 total bushings. So the window gets one on the top, one on the bottom. These bushings have a lip on them, so that holds them in place. That's what holds the window together, or holds this to the window safely. There's also this right here, which goes through the window here to keep it from contacting metal. So we'll let that sit out for a minute, because what we're going to be doing. Now, initially, you want to think that your window was set from the factory correctly. So it shouldn't really need adjustment. So we want to make sure that if we turn this, we keep the original spacing set. So you want to turn it just one time and make sure you keep it that way as we go through and put the new bushings on. The next is the fun of pressing these pieces on to the posts. And this is a process that, if you have a press of some sort, is easier than a big vise. I used a vise the first set, and I hammered and hammered and hammered to get it to turn on the vise. So we want to get this on our socket, and we got to make sure we get it the correct direction. So the best thing to do is to take your post, look at your direction that you've got to go, and then bring your socket that's going to fit here up in it. This way you make sure you don't go the wrong direction, because if you go the wrong direction, you wasted it, because these don't come off without cutting them off. So we can recheck, make sure that this is the correct direction to go on our post. That's what it is. Now, the other thing you want to do before you really get this in here is you want to get a little bit of grease on it. So this is just some regular grease. And you're going to use this grease in the window track as well, because that's why these things break, is they lose their grease. So we put some grease on the socket, get some grease up inside the post. This will get grease as it goes down. But we want to take our piece here, take our piece, and put it in our press, and ease the socket down into the piece, kind of try to center it up as best you can, and go nice and easy on this, because we've got to get our socket to not split the new piece as it goes up here, and get it most of the way, almost all the way to the end, and then release your press. And I probably gotta go a little bit more. Oh, that's right, this one took all the way. Okay, so we got our press release down. Now we can take our socket that we're going to use under this piece, under the post. You want one that's really close to the size of this post, because if you get out here or anywhere, you'll start bending this metal instead of getting the post to go down. So this is going to go at the top of this unit. You know, it's all how you want to use your press. This press is not an actual press, so that's why I'm doing it this way. So we've got our stack of stuff as we go up here. And the main thing you want to do is you want to make sure this is nice and centered on here, because if it's not, that's when you have problems. You know, to make sure everything is nice and as straight as possible as you're pressing. And try to get your post that you're going on to as centered over that socket as possible, so everything lines up as good as possible. And of course, move it around too much, you lose your sockets. So we'll get that back on there, move that into there, and then we'll give it a press. And keep a good hand on this piece, because it'll want to turn different places sometimes. This one just went perfectly in there. And then we can release our pressure, drop this back down, and see that this one's nice and actually has a little bit of looseness to it in here, because these posts are not always exactly the same tightness as this. Sometimes when you get your piece on, it's very tight. It just depends on how much play you get between the post and the back as to whether it has any looseness to it. And now for the other two that I've got to throw on. And again, we take our socket out of our post, add a little bit of grease to it before we put the socket in the piece. Put the socket in the piece, make sure we are the correct direction before we start. Then have the fun of jacking to get your piece together here. And then push it slow to get it to ease over the socket. Bring it right up to the, almost to the edge. That way you can still see the socket a little bit when you go to put it in the next piece. Keep it in our hand as best as we can. Make sure it's not going to catch the other part of this as it goes up. We want to press the piece, not the other part. Bring your press up. Get it tightened up enough where you can kind of hand work it. Check your alignments. Make sure everything looks good. And then ease your piece on down and on. And that one snapped in at the last second. So this one's probably going to be nice and loose like the other one was, because these posts were actually not tight on the piece. You can see the post spins on here. Okay, now that we have our window pieces on the window, or the door track, we can put this back on the window, and we have to put our black piece back in the bottom to sit for safety there, and then get these lined up inside the window track. Okay. And sometimes it's easier said than done. Get that lined up. Get the other one. Once you've made it fall out from moving the other one around too much, get those up in here lined up, and then take your top sides, put them down. screws in. And the main thing you have to do is you have to make sure you have your piece that your track goes onto as the left side and not the right side. The right side, or the front, the rear, is this nice big piece here. And then you ease your screws down to where they're snug, because we don't want to break the window. So get them nice and snug. And you can see it's not moving on the window. So we look and see if it looks like it's supposed to. Hopefully it's close to where it was before. And then we repeat that process for the front window piece. Then we're ready to go put it back in the car. One thing to do is make sure you grease this track. So put some grease down in the track before you put your windows back down in. Put some extra grease just because. This is a very important step to keep your window rollers to keep working for a good long time. Is to get some grease down in the tracks. Make sure you do both the front and the rear track. And give them a good amount of grease in each one. Don't worry about getting extra, it'll take care of itself. So now that you've got your window greased, it's time to try to get the window back down in the holes. And this piece back here gets in the way sometimes. Usually these will go right back into place, like that one's going into place. But this front one's being a little difficult. It does not want to, even with pushing my finger up in here, it's not wanting to get around it enough. So sometimes you got to use a little bit of help to get something down past it before you go down the hole. Is that thing not lined up right? And this right now is a test fit to make sure that we've got these screwed back in kind of in the right spot for what it's supposed to have. And this one is just not wanting to get down in this hole. There we go. There it is. Okay. So now we got that down the hole. We can pull that out of the way. See if this front one fits. Make sure you get your front piece up here in the right spot as well, so that the window slides down in the tracks that it's supposed to slide into. It looks like we've got this window a little off of where the original tracking was, so I've got to do a slight adjustment to it. Let's pull it back up a little bit. Okay. Oops. Oh, that's what I did. Caught the back one wrong. So there's a bunch of spots on the window that you can get off kilter as you go down. This one's actually catching there too. Okay, now we're in the holes. Okay. Now we're in the holes, and as you can see, we've hit the piece where the window stops at. So, let's make sure this comes up and looks good. Looks about right, so I'm going to go ahead and retighten these. The window down in the hole. And then we're going to find our 10mm bolt that goes to here as we push this. So try to get this lined up on this piece. There we go. It has a little bit of a catch to it right there that holds it to it. Tighten that down. Then we want to take our two stop points, get them back in their home positions, and see if we can use the factory position by lining them. lining up where the metal was affected from being on it so long. Let's see if we can get this one to go back down the window. Catch its home, and it used to go to, which looks like it out there. Okay, and then we want to make sure the window actually works at this point. So we can turn our key switch back on. We can plug in our window switch, and we can roll it up and use it up to the stop points, make sure it stops. Make sure it goes all the way down and has fun, so it goes all the way down. And then once we bring it back up to the top, we can now check for how well it actually fits the car as it closes. Make sure that we're under everything and make sure that it's in the correct positioning as it closes. And looks like we've got pretty good gaps. Looks like we're in the right back where it was at the factory. So now we have a window that goes up and down. Has a little bit of play to it, but none at the top. And a good shut and tighten to the where it was before from the factory.
Yeah, go.
Okay, now that we have the door window back in place and it looked like all the alignment was good, we can now put the door panel back in. And this is easier done when the window is down. And we just take and set this top piece over the top of the door metal here. Make sure our lock comes up into place. And then we just kind of pop this down into place behind the metal. Top piece down, and then we can take, and one of the things we can use besides putting the pieces back in, we can tighten this bottom bolt down here first, and that'll at least, especially on these two-piece panels, keep the panel together a bit. The second thing we want to do is we want to get this screw in here to hold the door panel backward, or this piece into here, whatever is there. You've got a plastic piece, a screw, whatever you've got in the hole here. Get that back on to hold it in. And then you want to pop your clips back into place around the door. Some up here in the front and all across the bottom. There's a rubber piece down here that you want to make sure kind of sits as your seal. You want to get it under the door or around the edge of the door. And then you want to put your screw in up here on the front. And our screw here. The other things that we need to do is we need to make sure we have our wiring up for our power windows and locks in the mirror. Go ahead and plug this stuff back in. Make sure that's all good and tight. There's usually a clip and a clip that holds this thing in place. Pop that back into place. We have our rod that comes over here to hold the door up, or to open the door. That is always good to make sure it's up before you put all this stuff on, because now I got to take this back apart to get it. So we get our rod, we get our piece, get it arranged the right direction. And this is one of the real fun ones, is getting these rods back in, because they do not like to work all the time. And we just got to put that clip around, catch it, push it on the rod and the snaps, and then our door handle will work again. There we go. Tighten the door panel or door handle up. And then we got to make sure we put our screw down here in our cup, because this is what lets us keep the door the door panel kind of in the car when we go to shut the door with this cup piece. And unfortunately, his stuff's getting a little tight on here. But that's basically the door panel and a working window.